there, welcome back to another show. Today is They Didn't Need This Failure episode with two films by the same director, Sam Raimi, which is Crimewave and Quick and the Dead. I bring both of these up because I think these were both films that were failures that made him change his career. He's had other failures in his career, but not as big as these two, I don't think, for like where they made him go in his career. And Raimi's had a very good career. He's done a lot of really good stuff, but he's a very distinctive director. But these are two films that are very interesting, but they did both bomb, and they did make him switch up what he was doing. So the first one is Crimewave. You can get an indicator. There's an indicator release where you get the film, different versions of the film, commentaries, like interviews with different people involved in the film. So it's a really good pub indicator. I highly recommend it. I've got it. It's in my pile somewhere. I try to look for it to show it off, but I don't know where I put it. It's in the room somewhere. And also I did Quick and the Dead. I've seen 4K via iTunes. So Crimewave was the film that Raimi made after Evil Dead. Evil Dead, they shot for no money, took forever to do. So it was one of those films where they said they take 10 hours to do a shot sometimes because it was such complicated shots. So they were doing it low budget, driving the crew mad, driving their actors mad, people quitting and all the rest of it. But they made a terrific little film that made a fortune, got banned in the UK for a bit. But it's classic. Everyone who knows horror has seen Evil Dead. Most people who know anything about horror will have seen Evil Dead at some point. It's one of those films that everyone's seen because it's known as one of the best ones of the 80s. So after that, they need to do a follow-up, and Raimi did not want to just do Evil Dead 2 straight away and just... He didn't want to do Evil Dead 2 at all. So, with the Coen Brothers, Joe Coen was an editor, an assistant on Evil Dead. So, you can see that they can influence each other a lot in the 80s. You know, they both have a liking for eccentric characters. They both have a liking for extreme weird shots to suggest character. But the Coen Brothers tend to be a bit more towards realism, and Raimi's much more cartoonish and comic booky. But they wrote this one together, Crimewave, and none of them were happy with the finished film. None of them were particularly pleased with it. And it's the film that's on the CV, you pull it at the bottom of like, yeah, we did it, but it didn't work. So while this was getting made, the Coen Brothers went and made Blood Simple. But I think it was written at the same time. It was just like, they shot theirs and it came out and was released and did well. And then Crimewave sort of staggered out like a drunk later because the company that made it was like, we have no idea what to do with this thing. It's weird. It's like, it's just strange. Like, they wouldn't, like Sam Raimi did his cut of it, then they brought someone in to try and recut it. And then he had to go out and fight for everything, and there's lots of like tracking shots that was cut into pieces because they didn't get it. And it was a film that didn't come together. Had to shoot a new opening wraparound because it was such a short film to add some tension early on because you know that things were going to go bad. And there was a lot of film noir stuff, like someone trying to kill his business partner and it going wrong, and then the complications of the hitmen being involved with these other people's lives that caused all these miscommunications and murders. Very much like Blood Simple. Blood Simple's a much better film. You know, this is a cartoonish version of Blood Simple. But it is a mess, but it's a wonderful mess. It's one of those films that's like, it's so over the top and it's so energetic that even though you know it's a mess, even though you know there's problems with it, it still works in lots of ways. It still has a lot of fun, even though you know it never came together properly. First of all, they wouldn't let Bruce Campbell be the lead. So that was an issue. So he got a supporting partner. He was one of the producers. And as he said in the extras, he was a producer already in the project, and he still couldn't get the lead part. That's how little faith they had in him. So they hired a journeyman actor who actually did a pretty decent job. And Bruce Campbell played one of the heroes in the film, and he's a hilarious anytime he turns up. Ed Pressman, the producer, ended up being a supporting part as one of the guys trying to kill his partner. And he's funny as this little nerd who things don't go well for him. You have a lot of good fun characters throughout it. But you also have Brian James and the guy who played Popeye or Bruto from Popeye, as the two villains who are actually out, who kill the people at the beginning and actually try and cover their tracks and at least have more and more murders. And they're insane throughout it. And they're the best part of it. They're just cartoonish, weird characters. You know, that were, you know, would lead to the villains in Raising Arizona, who also had that kind of same crazy energy. But it was used much better in Raising Arizona. This is a film where everything kind of never came together. But it was like a film where everyone took bits from it and you did it better later on. Like on the next films, basically. So it's that kind of film where it was a mistake. There's a lot of mistakes made. But they probably need to do it because, I mean, early on, basically Bruce Campbell in interviews basically said that they learned how to become professionals in this film. They learned how to deal with actors. They learned how to deal with schedules. They learned how to deal with production companies and what they wanted from films. And they did everything wrong. So when they went up to do the films after this, they were much better off because they knew what actually was going to go on. Because the first film they made, they did it all themselves. And they didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. They didn't have to deal with it, they did it all badly, and then they figured it out for Evil Dead 2. What they could give up, what they couldn't. So this film is just a strange film with a lot of gags. The funny thing is, there's a joke in this film that Raimi repeated in Doctor Strange 2, in Multiverse of Madness. And I saw these films about a week apart, and I was like, that's the same joke. He used the same joke from Crimewave. And it was quite funny to see him actually just pull something from his arsenal from even a film that wasn't well liked. He used the same gag. It's all to do with doors, people closing doors and getting chased, that is really funny in this film. And really silly. There's lots of silly as hell stuff in it. Lots of people dying in funny ways. People hanging off of bridges. People race against time. People getting sent to the big chair. You know, in prison to get electrocuted. There's lots of hilariously weird stuff. In some ways, it reminds me a lot of 1941, the Spielberg film, where Spielberg had lots of money and did about 5 different films in one go. And it was like, and then they tried to cut them all together, and it was like, this is a weird film. How does it come together again? It's that kind of film. This film's the same way. It's like, there's lots of stuff in it, and it's like, there's one sequence where suddenly there's a dance contest, which the people involved, the heroes lose. You know, there's lots of weird stuff with Bruce Campbell being the ultimate hero. You've got there's lots of weird stuff in the murders as well, and the love story that where one of the guy's in love with her and she can't stand him, but he keeps on saving her life, so she feels obligated. You know, there's lots of really funny things in there. It's just they never quite nailed it. But they needed the failure to go on, so, you know, the Coens learned how to deal with companies to make their own films their own way. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell with Tapper 2 were the Evil Dead team. They learned a lot how to do it. Then they moved on to Evil Dead 2, which is a wonderful film. They did everything they did wrong here, they did right there. But they needed this film probably to jump into Evil Dead 2, which is also a wacky, weird, funny film. But it had a much clearer base for where it was going and where it was coming from. So it was one of those situations where they learned what the limitations were. So after Evil Dead 2, Raimi was big again. He made Darkman, which had some studio problems, but he got through them. He made Army of Darkness, which is Evil Dead 3, which is a wonderful film that no one got. And following the failure of that in America, even though it did okay overseas, it was one of those films that was a perceived failure, but it probably did okay ultimately. He moved on then to Quick and Dead. This was his final kind of crazy Raimi film where the characters were all kind of very one-dimensional, and it was all about the camera angles and the weird shots he could do. This was the final one where he would go all out in this. Because the failure of this film taught him he actually had to learn about acting. And learn about how to deal with actors. Because before, he'd been using Bruce Campbell and torturing him, and hiring, in the 80s, if an actor wasn't Bruce Campbell or wasn't a character actor they'd hired who could be left alone to do their job, the performances were never that good. He always needed actors who could take care of themselves, basically, because he was too busy doing the shots. And after the failure of Quick and Dead, he said he kind of refocused to try and get good with dealing with actors. And he went on to then do A Simple Plan, which is a big comeback film, which was no big camera moves, all acting. Did For the Lovely Game with Kevin Costner. Did The Gift with Cate Blanchett, which was a nice little film. And then we did Spider-Man films, which combined both elements. You did more over-the-top Sam Raimi stuff, but also had the character stuff as well. And that's when he kind of slowly had to come back towards doing more comic booky stuff and being sillier again. But not full on as it once was. Because, one of the joys of the early part of Sam Raimi's career was the characters were cardboard, the characters were very one-dimensional, and you could do anything with them because they were basically almost like Looney Tunes characters. Later on, you couldn't do as much of that with them because they actually had arcs, and actually, even though they were broad, they were a bit more towards life. So there was a little bit less crazy. So Quick and Dead's the final one where he gets to go crazy. Now this came out of the fact that Sharon Stone had just a massive hit with Basic Instinct. It was like, what do you want to do? And he had a script with a female gunslinger called Quick and Dead that a guy called Simon Moore had written, who did Traffic, the original Traffic miniseries. So they did that, and basically it was a film about lots of gun fights within this one town, a gunfight competition. And it was a spaghetti western riff, love the spaghetti westerns. So Sharon Stone actually said, I want Sam Raimi to direct it. Because apparently she was a big fan of his. It was like, and no one wanted him, but because they wanted her to do the film, they begrudgingly let him come on and be the director. And they got a film exactly the film that the Evil Dead fans would love, and exactly the kind of film that studios would go, what the hell is this? Because it is utterly cartoonish. There's so many great shots in this film. I should say I watched both of these on projector, so you get to go them closer to cinematic experience and seeing how the big screen with some of the weird Raimi shots, you really need just the impact of the shots and the weirdness of the cinematography and how the shots are set up. Even though they seem silly, they're set up a certain way to deliver and build and build and build and build. So there's a plan to them all, it's just that it's a very eccentric plan. But this one really delivers. I saw it in the cinema when it came out. I was one of the few who saw it. And then I've seen it recently in the projector, and it's just, you really need the cinema. I mean, it does not transcend into the smaller screen the same way some of his other films do, because it is, the plot basically is a series of gunfights, and that's it. There's some revenge involved, there's some funny moments involved, but it is those scenes that are the important thing, and how he varies the shots and scenes in the scenes, so that each one's slightly different, so you're not getting the same gag again and again and again. Which you'd probably get with most directors doing this. It's probably the same setups. Here, every setup is different. Every setup's ridiculous, knowingly ridiculous, and really, really, really silly. But it just delivers. I mean, John Sayles was brought in to rewrite it. To rewrite the script. And then And he said it probably needed more time to do it, but he did what he could with what he had. So he was brought in to beef up the Gene Hackman character. Because Gene Hackman as a villain, and they wanted to give him some stuff to do. And there's lots of wonderful little bits and bobs in there with him and DiCaprio. And there's a lot of stuff you can feel the influence of John Sayles there. I mean, Simon Moore, who wrote the original draft, said that they cut all the John Sayles stuff back out. But I don't buy it. I really don't buy it, because there's lots of stuff in there that feels very Sayles-like. Which makes it a really weird thing, because you get these weird little John Sayles bits in there. Because, I mean, the only person who said that was the original writer. Everyone else said Sayles would come in and added character stuff to them and did a lot of the dialogue. So it feels like it's... Well, yeah, there was an impact with him. And so it's very funny because you get some nice Sayles touches mixed in with the over-the-top. The funny thing is, when you see it on a smaller screen, they seem to be clashing with each other a little bit. But you see it on a bigger screen, the more kind of lower, the talking stuff and the outrageous fight scenes play off each other brilliantly, because they're paced so well to go back and forward, and it just feels like one weird world. And a small screen, I always find that the talking scenes pace it down a little bit too much, but the bigger screen doesn't. It's this weird thing of, because the way you watch a film on the big screen, the way your attention goes, it seems perfect, and all the little nuances of the actors, which you see a lot more on the bigger screen, just makes it pace better. So it really is a big screen film. But the film is beautiful. The film is really beautiful, and there's so many supporting actors that you'll recognise the face and go, oh, that's him, that's him, that's him. And they all die in funny ways. I mean, Lance Henriksen's in it and he gets killed brutally. Keith David's in it and he gets some great stuff with Hackman. You know, I mean, they both get great stuff with Hackman. So that's probably why they wanted to do the film, was to do some scenes with Hackman. DiCaprio and Hackman have a nice little relationship, because DiCaprio's his son, but he won't acknowledge it. And DiCaprio's a show-off who's very insecure behind the scenes, and they play off each other really well, because it's an abusive relationship, because Hackman is totally awful to him. You have Russell Crowe as the old riding mate of Hackman, who turned his back on that and became a preacher. And Hackman gets his men to hunt him down, find him, hunt him down, and bring him back, even though he's been away for years. And basically, Hackman's trying to force him back into his way of crime and make him do the gunfights. And it's because he doesn't want to die, he ends up doing the gunfights, but he's always getting more and more guilty about it. And this is one of the early Crowe films that brought him into America. This is probably the first big one that got the attention of people in America. I mean, there was Romper Stomper and a bunch of Australian films that would get attention to the critics, but actually getting attention of the people. I mean, he was in Virtuosity, where it was terrible. The whole film was awful. This is the first, decent film he was in, and then he just blew up with LA Confidential and Inside, and then Gladiator. This is the first kind of culty film that a lot of American film fans would have seen, because there's nothing more hit than being a Sam Raimi film. So basically, just after this, both Crowe and DiCaprio both really took off. But at the time, they were rising stars who were still having to hustle to get the next gig, you know. And they're both great in it, and they're both have some fun. They have some fun scenes together as well. I mean, the person who gets off worst is Stone, because even though it was her project, the character, it's one of those things where her character could have done with a few more scenes. Just to finish it off, you just feel there's a little bit, the arc could be a little bit compressed. So it's not really a performance issue. It's just a writing issue. It just seems like the character is not as well served as some of the other characters. And you just feel there's a little bit more you need. But the payoff of why she's going for revenge and why she is how she is great. There's a really nice twist on the spaghetti western tropes in this film that is pretty brutal. And even that minor flaw it's still one of Stone's best films she did in the 90s after she became a star. I mean, to be honest, I'd rate this higher than Basic Instinct, just as a film, just as entertainment. It's much more fun, even though I'm a massive Verhoeven fan. But yeah, it's just a really enjoyable film, but it's not for everybody. And it was so outrageously odd that it bombed and no one got it until like it became a cult film almost instantly. It was like, this film is great, why don't you get it? But it was just one of those films that it came out after the big Western push with Unforgiven. It was a few years later, and this was like a parody of it all, and it just was the wrong time to do this film. But thank God they did it anyway, because it is so much enjoyable. I mean, it's like it's also this weird thing of having Raimi direct something that John Steele's script doctored, and this weird combination of two of the most opposite talents ever in film in a project together. It's just a lot of fun. And all those actors around them, all of whom are really delivering. I mean, Hackman's a really good villain in this, because a lot of the time he's usually playing characters with shades of grey, and this one, he's a total bastard. He's awful. He deserves to die, and how he dies is very Raimi, and it's stunningly funny. There's a side gag that you really need to see. It's just so funny. So, yeah, I mean, this is wonderful. But it was a failure Raimi needed, so he wouldn't just focus on the visuals, because he was putting himself into a corner of not being hireable, but because he was making films that were very cult films, but weren't very mainstream in the sense of getting audiences. So he switched around and actually got some audiences after this by adjusting slightly. So it meant he lost something in the outrageousness, but he gained something with humanity. And by the time we got into the 2000s, he kind of figured out how to mix both again. But it took a while. And then when Spider-Man, really, both sides of him suddenly were in cohesion, and he was making films that made a fortune and everyone loved. So it took a while to get that mix right, but it got there eventually. But he needed these two films, I think, to kind of get the building blocks right. So, and one of them is Queen of Dead is wonderful, and Crimewave is fun and underrated. It's not a disposable film. It's just like a weaker film by a director who's done a lot more good stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope I didn't ramble on too much. I could easily ramble on a lot more about these films because they are really enjoyable. They're both two films I've loved for years, so it's quite nice to talk about them. So I'll be back later with another video.